The Maurin Academy is a 21st century agronomic university. We draw inspiration from the life and work of Peter Maurin, co-founder along with Dorothy Day of the Catholic Worker Movement, as well as from various intellectual and practical engagements with other currents of thought. Maurin envisioned agronomic universities, places where people could learn about life, culture, agriculture, science, and religion together. And he envisioned houses of hospitality, places that, quote, bring the scholars to the workers or the workers to the scholars. These tenets are at the core of the Maurin Academy's mission.
So we're going to move on to him. And keep all of this kind of in the rear view because he's going to engage directly with some of what we've discussed so far in the text we're going to break down today, which is his 1922 work, Antimodern. So quick little biographical overview. He was a French Catholic philosopher born in 1882, died in 1973. He's born in Paris to a middle-class kind of liberal Protestant family. So he's not born a Catholic. He's going to convert later on. He attends the Sorbonne, meets his wife, Jacques Maritain. She's, I believe, from Russia. She's kind of this poet, mystic figure. And, the two of them are doing the French thing. They're studying philosophy and ideas at the Sorbonne, and they're questioning the meaning of life, and they're disillusioned with the modern scientific worldview, and everything's hopeless. And so they make a suicide pact, essentially. And if we don't find meaning within the year, then it's all over. We'll go down together. And then they come upon the philosophy of Henri Bergson. He's a French philosopher. I personally haven't read a lot of Bergson, but he's got some interesting thinking on time and intuition. Famously, he has this idea of the élan vital, which is kind of this, I'm not even qualified to explain it, but if you want to learn more about Bergson, I encourage you to. I'll join you. And he's seen as kind of an antidote to this impoverished scientific rationalistic worldview that they're very disillusioned with, right? And then subsequently, they're going to convert both of them to Catholicism in 1906. And this comes about because I believe Jacques gets sick and is like convalescing near a Dominican monastery or something, and she's influenced by this Dominican who's this exposes she and Jacques Maritain to Thomas Aquinas, and the world opens up and they convert to Catholicism. Actually, no. Okay, I'm getting it wrong. I think the conversion happens earlier, and then they're exposed to Thomism by the Dominican. And then he's writing throughout this period. He's in France. He's very plugged in to kind of the French intellectual culture in this time. Of course, between these years, we have here 1907 and 1922. World War I happens. That's going to have a big influence on Maritain's thinking and on the broader French intellectual environment. And that's kind of the backdrop here. Politically, along the way, he has a stint as a kind of leftist at some point in his younger years, which he's then going to disavow very forcefully in the text we see today. And by the time we're in 1922, he's kind of like a lot of French intellectuals, flirting around with kind of right-wing French nationalist politics, and I guess one thing to keep in mind with all of this is a decade before the ascent of the Nazi Party, and some of what we see in hindsight with his affiliations is going to look just as bad to him down the road as it does to us. For example, he's involved with this notorious French nationalist, anti-Semite, named Charles Maurras, who is kind of, we could describe him as a French integralist. So he's advocating for this new kind of, well, not new, but this return to Christendom, where there's this alliance between, religion and state. And eventually the Vatican actually renounces him. And I'm looking at your comment here, Lori. Yeah, we'll get to that in just a second. So anyways, the younger Maritain, I don't know. The older Maritain is going to look back on the younger Maritain and have some questions too. Later on, and I've included it here just to kind of foreshadow a little bit, he gets involved directly with the Catholic worker movement. He's a friend of the movement, a supporter. And yeah, in the bottom right here, we see him with Peter Maurin and Dorothy Day, and that's Jacques and Raisa right here. So a very interesting figure. There's a lot to unpack, even just in his biography. Let me see what's next here. Yeah, okay. So let's kind of hone in on the year 1922 here, when he publishes Antimodern, which is really a culmination of several essays he's written in the preceding decade. This is a moment when the term anti-modern is going to have an immediate polemical connotation, especially in the context he's writing in, which is French Catholicism in the early 20th century. So beginning in the 19th century, you have what people refer to today as kind of the modernist crisis, where the Vatican gets fiercely and polemically anti-modern in the more straightforward sense of rejecting modern politics, modern reason, Enlightenment thoughts as kind of, well, we're going to look at a quote here in a minute, but as this kind of grave threat to order and to faith and to the church. And so the church at this moment in history is taking a very kind of reactionary, defensive approach. And just for a taste of this, I've drawn an excerpt from Pope Pius X's encyclical Pascendi Dominici Gregis, which was published in 1907. And this is one of a series of encyclicals, which are just letters to the church and the wider world that fit into this kind of anti-modernism that's coming out of the church very vocally in this time period. We won't read the whole thing here, but he doesn't really mince words. So that we make no delay in this matter, addressing modernism, is rendered necessary, especially by the fact that the partisans of error are to be sought not only among the church's open enemies, they lie hid, a thing to be deeply deplored and feared in her very bosom and heart, and are the more mischievous, the less conspicuously they appear. We allude, venerable brethren, to the many who belong to the Catholic laity, nay, this is lamentable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he's talking about, these evil secular moderns who are corrupting the church from within and need to be resisted with the full force of the church and faith. And so the response to this philosophically is reject all the Enlightenment thought, reject kind of modern politics. The big moment hovering in the background here is the French Revolution, which is devastating for the Catholic Church, especially in France. And so that's what inspires a lot of this. Before that, you actually have a relatively fruitful kind of culture of exchange between Catholic Church and modern thought and Enlightenment thought. But that's all gone by the wayside at this point. So instead of engaging with the Enlightenment, we're all going to be Thomists, which means we're going to revive the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. And so this is called the Neo-Scholastic revival. And this is something that Maritain, a almost lifelong Thomist, is going to himself embrace. But as we're about to see, it's going to look different than the approach that we're getting out of the Vatican at this time. So, starting with the text, a lot of the arguments that we're going to review here, coming from Maritain, would be familiar to anybody reading these encyclicals. So there is a genuinely reactionary kind of polemical element to this, but there's also a lot to kind of read between the lines. So the kind of the core argument here, when Maritain's laying out his anti-modernism, is there are these various what he calls maladies of modern thought. And those are naturalism, individualism, subjectivism, scientism, and egocentrism. And, you know, for him, these are all features of what he calls the révolution anti-chrétienne. So this is the anti-Christian revolution that he thinks goes all the way back to those medieval nominalists that we talked about last time, so people like Duns Scotus and Occam, but then also Luther and the Protestant Reformation, and then up through Descartes and Kant. We're not going to get into each respective thinker right now, but what all these thinkers have in common for Maritain is kind of this inward turn, right? So we saw that with the nominalism, right? That's where we had this shift from form, meaning, objective intelligibility. It's no longer discovered in the world. It's something that's kind of projected. Luther, obviously, there's conflict between faith and reason, and we turn inward and accept things on faith, right? And there's also the kind of anti-institutional character, of course, of the Protestant Reformation, and the authority is seized from the church hierarchy and returned to the individual, who can now be trusted to read the Bible, and so forth. Descartes, famously, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. That's the only thing I can know with certainty. Before even I know God, I know that I am, and I can't trust necessarily my ability to know the external world. And so we have a deepening of the inward turn. And then a thinker like Immanuel Kant, kind of one of the quintessential Enlightenment thinkers. For him, Kant has what he calls his Copernican revolution of the mind, right? So categories that we might ordinarily think are out there in the world, time, space, and causation, they're actually these transcendental features of consciousness that structure our experience. And so we can speak, with certainty about appearances, but then, and what comes to consciousness, so the phenomena, but then there's the noumena that lie beyond our reach, right? And so again, we have this kind of inward turn, as Maritain's going to read it, at least. And so he thinks this is all bad. It's led to individualism. When he says naturalism, he means a kind of materialistic science that reduces everything to just matter and calculation and manipulability. And to the second bullet here, really, if we were to boil this down to one big error, it would concern the separation between reason and reality. And again, for Maritain, that goes back to this moment with the nominalists in late medieval history, who were opponents of Maritain's favorite philosopher, of course, Thomas Aquinas. And so if you're not familiar with the thought of Aquinas, I think just even moving through these arguments, you'll kind of get a feel for it via Maritain. So on the second bullet, modern error, we have secular reason, as Maritain's going to refer to it, or la raison purement discourante. And this is the purely discursive reason that doesn't aim for truth or correspond to reality, no reason that ultimately leads to relativism, because it's not grounded in any deeper truth, right? So it's purely discursive and ultimately self-undermining, right? That's how he's going to describe secular reason. The Thomistic response to this, what you would find a big theme in St. Thomas Aquinas, is reason is a faculty of the real, as he puts it here, faculté du réel, that participates in the divine light of truth. So reason is something we can trust, not something we need to doubt, and it draws us closer to truth, right? Participates in it. We have another error, right? He's going to critique modern science as a distortion of reason and a rejection of faith. So the modern error here, science in its modern form represents just the brute power of secular reason. Think of our discussion about Francis Bacon last time, right? The point of science is not merely to learn interesting things about the world. It's to harness the world, right? To exert power over it. The more we know about it, the more that we can manipulate it in accordance with our own desires. So it's not regulated by anything. It's not limited by anything. The Thomistic response, if you think of medieval scholasticism and what a thinker like Thomas Aquinas is going to say, they're not anti-science at all. They were actually very empirical thinkers who were very interested in the natural world, and the important thing for them is that science is not an independent thing or the highest order of knowledge. Instead, it's ordered toward and subservient to philosophy and theology. So, philosophy completes science and theology completes philosophy, right? There's this kind of ordering to knowledge. And so science isn't just unconstrained and independent, right? It's limited and ultimately in the service of truth, right? In this richer metaphysical sense. Another way to think about it, to return to some of the categories from last time, you can't have just purely material and efficient causation, matter, and just straightforward cause and effect. We also need to account for formal and final causes. So the principles of things and the purpose, right? Science ignores all of that. And he's saying that that's kind of the beginning of the end here. And so overall, what he's advocating throughout much of the text is just a restored confidence in reason and a teleological or purposive understanding of reality that we find, he says, in Thomism. So in part, when he's saying he's anti-modern, what he's meaning is he's critiquing and rejecting everything we kind of have on the slide here. And then he's proposing as a solution, Thomism. So anti-modernism has this critical dimension. Here's everything that's wrong with modernity. And then constructively, the way we're supposed to be anti-modern is to embrace the thought of Thomas Aquinas. A couple more slides on Antimodern, but any questions at this point or anything we want to add or revisit here?